Hello there, and welcome to the Scruffy-Looking Nerders podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, bringing you news on all things nerd and geek related. But this week is a special episode because it's my Captain Marvel review episode. I went and watched it Saturday with my girlfriend, and here is my review of it. First part's going to be a spoiler-free review, which I typed up and I posted on the website at slnhpodcast.com, so go check it out. And I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. But then I'm going to give you a warning and let you know, after that warning, it'll be more spoilers. So here we go. So Captain Marvel's advertisement stated that she flies higher, farther, faster, stronger, similar to a Daft Punk song, and it delivered. I've been a fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe since the first Iron Man movie, and this is a fantastic origin film to add to the collection, raking in over close to $500 million worldwide on its opening weekend. Carol Danvers, played by the personable Brie Larson, is an extraterrestrial warrior who gets caught in the middle of a galactic battle between her people, the Kree, and the Skrulls. She lands on Earth in the year 1995 as she tries fighting through memories of her life as an Air Force pilot. She gets help along the way from Nick Fury, played once again by Samuel L. Jackson, Maria Rambeau, played by Lashana Lynch, and Agent Coulson, played by Clark Gregg. Brie Larson, as I said, comes across very personable, likable, and brilliant as we see her voyage of not knowing who she is and discovering who she will become. The film is full of strong women, which is something refreshing to see. I understand the comics didn't go over too well, but Kelly Sue DeConnick and Dexter Soy's 2012 series of Captain Marvel really launched the character onto my comic radar. It's easy to see the influence that series run had on this movie. I've seen a lot of criticism of Larson's portrayal as flat or quote-unquote wooden, and I have got to say, I don't see it. She is stoic when her character needs to be, she's humorous when she needs to be, and she's emotional when she needs to be. I thought her performance was pretty great. It was interesting to see a young Nick Fury. They digitally altered his and Greg's appearance in post-production, similar to Tony Stark in Civil War. Fury in this is a lowly agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., or a desk jockey, and nowhere near as confident as we've seen him in previous installments in the MCU. So this is his first foray, so to speak, into the cosmic/alien type setting. But Jackson's performance delivers just like all of his other appearances. Lashana Lynch's character, Maria Rambeau, was another great addition, set in a time of the military not allowing women to be fighter pilots. It was definitely her and Danvers having to prove themselves in a male-dominated profession. So they were working with Annette Bening's character on a secret mission. I was really hoping to have more of Annette Bening's character and Lashana Lynch's characters in the movie, but I felt satisfied with the screen time that we got with them. I do have a feeling we haven't seen the last of Maria Rambeau or her daughter Monica, portrayed by the adorable Akira Akbar. Monica Rambeau in the comics later becomes Miss Marvel, and there's already talks of having Miss Marvel potentially in the MC universe in the future. Stanley's cameo really brought a tear to my eye, seeing him for the first time since his passing. It was similar to seeing Princess Leia after Carrie Fisher had passed, which was equally as painful to my heart. The 90s setting was a good flashback for me as I grew up in the 90s. And it was pretty rad seeing Blockbuster and Acid Wash Jeans, and the soundtrack is on par equally with Guardians of the Galaxy movie soundtracks. The fight scenes are sparse throughout the first half of the film, but they really picked up about midway through the second act and only go up from there. I loved the take on the reimagined telling of the hero's journey that they did, so it's more refreshing than just another origin film that we've seen in the MCU, or even from what DC has brought to the table. Pacing of the movie was dragged out just a little too long at certain times, but it would quickly pick back up, and that thought would be pushed right out of my mind. What can I say about Goose the cat? He's freaking adorable and definitely shines as a great addition to this movie. Any scene he's in is sure to be a great one. So in closing, with my non-spoiler review, I'm not saying that this is a perfect movie, but it is a damn good one. It's a nice cosmic/sci-fi/heroine origin movie for Marvel to add to their 20-plus movie catalog. It's a wonderful origin film, and I'm stoked to see what more she brings to the table once Avengers Endgame hits the big screens next month. Also, be sure to stay through to the end of the credits. And I gave Marvel's Captain Marvel 4 pizza slices out of 5. So, good job, Marvel. So here is, from here on out, it's spoilers. So, if you're not wanting to hear that, then thank you for listening to my non-spoiler review. I hope you will give the movie a chance because it is a fantastic movie, and I hope that you give it a chance. And now time for spoilers. You're on the highway to the spoiler zone. So, starting off with the comics, Captain Marvel, not the DC one, but the Marvel one that Shazam's coming out in a couple weeks, so I'll probably end up going and seeing that. But the Captain Marvel in Marvel, it started with Captain Marvel of the Kree militia, who was created by Stan Lee. He goes by the alias of Dr. Walter Lawson and was stationed on Earth to observe the developing technology to travel into space. He eventually casts away his alignment with the Kree and allies himself with Earth. The title eventually wasn't doing too hot, so Marvel revamped the character as the cosmic quote-unquote protector of the universe, and he fought Thanos and became a close ally of the Titans and even had a romantic relationship with Elysius. He eventually developed cancer as a result of an exposure to toxic gas during a battle with Nitro. Then the series was relaunched with Monica Rambeau taking on the name and eventually becoming the leader of the Avengers, although she eventually gave up the name to the original Captain Marvel's son and took on the name Photon. Then the title gets passed on to Genisvel in the 90s, then to Phyla-Vell in 2004, then a Skrull sleeper agent named Kinnear who was bound with Marvel's DNA. Then it went to Novar in the Dark Reign storyline. Then finally Carol Danvers in 2012, which that's the run I'm most familiar with. She transitioned from Miss Marvel to Captain Marvel, ditching her swimsuit costume for the jumpsuit of Captain Marvel. So, now onto the MCU. Brie Larson, as I said, did great as Carol Danvers. I loved her in Scott Pilgrim. I thought she was great in 21 Jump Street movie, which was actually surprisingly hilarious. I wasn't expecting that movie to be that funny. And then she has a brief appearance in 13 Going on 30 as one of the mean popular girls, which, fun fact, that film also stars Mark Ruffalo, who portrays Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk, aka the Smashed Man, aka Green Guy, aka the GIF. But I thought this was a great female-led superhero film. I wasn't a huge fan of Wonder Woman. I thought Catwoman was absolute garbage. Elektra was trash, so it was refreshing to see one be a breakout hit for me. Her powers in the comics resemble a white hole, like the power of a white hole, opposite of a black hole in space. While in the movie, she's bathed in radiation from the Tesseract exploding from that jump drive engine exploding. It was powered by the Tesseract, so she now has the radiation powers from the radiation from the Tesseract. And when she goes into binary mode, she's able to access all of her powers. She can breathe in space, she can travel at the speed of light, she can shoot photon beams out of her hands. Now, they didn't really showcase any of her weaknesses per se. Like, I know throughout the comics, she gets memory alterations, so they definitely went through that throughout the movie. But from one of her main ones is power depletion in the comics. So if she tries to sustain her binary mode for an extended period of time, she will need to recharge. At one point, she had to recharge for months at Avengers Mansion. So she was she could still fly and she could still do all that, but she couldn't really use her binary powers, or she could barely use her photon blasting powers. So I wonder if she'll attempt this in Endgame against Thanos and then be depleted. And also another weakness she's had is memory loss. It happened after Rogue from the X-Men stole her powers, and Professor Xavier was able to eventually restore her memories. But Kevin Feige has said that she does have an Achilles heel, so we'll probably see that in Endgame, I'm pretty sure. One thing I did really love though was her last scene, one of her last scenes with Jude Law in the movie, where he was like, "Come on, prove to me, blah blah blah," and she's like, "I don't have to prove anything to you." I was just like, "Hell yeah, tell him." One thing I enjoyed about the storytelling for this movie was that it was different, which I touched on in the non-spoiler review, and it reminds me of how Memento was done, or kind of RoboCop in a way, how like the character was like discovering themselves through memories and all that, but and nothing is really definite in the movie because of how as the movie progresses, you're not really sure who the enemy really is. So at first, you're like, oh well, the scrolls are the enemy, and then as the movie progresses, and then almost instantly you're just kind of like, wait a minute, like I remember the Kree were the bad guys in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then you see Ronan, you're like, no, yeah, Ronan the Accuser, the Kree are the bad guys. Is it the Skrulls? Is it the Kree? I just thought that was interesting. Throughout the movie, people are constantly telling her to control her emotions. They're telling her to control herself. She's been essentially brainwashed by the Kree, and her human side keeps trying to break out, and I definitely feel that's where she gets her rebellious side from. Humans are extremely emotional, and she doesn't do what she's told. So Jude Law was phenomenal in this movie, and what's funny is back when he was first cast, everyone automatically assumed he was going to be Marvel, but it ended up being Annette Bening, which I thought she was also really awesome, like I said earlier. But Jude Law is ultimately the main bad guy in this movie, which I thought was interesting. But it's also interesting how he's the mentor in the beginning of the movie, and the Skrulls are like the quote unquote bad guys. But I initially thought he was going to be essentially turning away from the Kree and helping Danvers and essentially betraying Ronan. But I'm happy with the way it ended, because I mean throughout the movie you kind of see he's like kind of going against what Ronan was saying and not relaying information that he should. So I don't know. We'll see how that plays out, because I mean they kept pretty much everyone alive, so it'll be interesting to see how these characters turn out in potential future sequels. And speaking of Ronan, he was kind of a side villain, almost to just kind of ground this movie into the MCU along with the Tesseract, which is kind of funny because at the beginning of the movie they're showing the Kree as the good guys, like I said earlier, but I was like, they're the bad guys in Guardians of the Galaxy. So it was interesting to see that, and how it kind of took me just a little bit to like my brain to click and figure that one out. Ben Mendelsohn as the Skrull character Tellus was so damn good. He really almost stole the show. He was the guy who played Director Krennic in Rogue One. He was in Ready Player One. Lots of ones. But he always plays a bad guy. So it was cool seeing him in such a likable role as Telos. And the way he was cracking jokes was great. I also really dug the Pulp Fiction nod with him. As he came in, he was drinking out of the same kind of cup as Samuel L. Jackson's character from Pulp Fiction was. I don't know, it was just really cool. Goose the cat slash the Flurkin was so damn adorable. And if you're not aware, Goose is based off of Danvers' cat in the comics, who was named Chewie, which is a Star Wars reference. Whereas Goose is a Top Gun reference, which you can clearly definitely see that the movie had a lot of Top Gun vibes to it. But there were so many hilarious moments with Goose, and the theater erupted with laughter when he was on screen. I loved the part when Talos was just like frightened by him. It's like, why is that thing on your lap? You shouldn't be holding that thing, which was kind of foreshadowing with what was going to come with the little kitty cat. Samuel L. Jackson was more of a supporting character rather than his normal, almost kind of cameo appearances in previous films. He had a predominant role in Winter Soldier, but even that, he was dead, but then he wasn't, and then so we didn't see a whole lot of him in that movie in Winter Soldier. So it was nice to see him in a role where it was almost like a buddy cop movie with Larson and him. I thought that was really interesting. I kind of wanted to see more of a young Coulson, but one of my biggest takeaways from this movie was just how much the Skrulls have changed the future of the MCU. Which characters are Skrulls, future Kree-Skrull wars. It's a huge thing with the comics, and the Skrulls are definitely more tied to the Fantastic Four, which Disney and Marvel are extremely close to getting the live-action rights back for the Fantastic Four, so that's a potential tie-in in the future as well. The Kree could potentially be a future enemy, as well as with the Skrulls, to be touched on again in a future movie, as they have branches of military, and they have a bunch of different accusers other than Ronin, so I definitely feel like we will see more cosmic superhero movies in the future. So to expand on what I was saying earlier about the 90s setting, apparently they actually used footage from action movies from the 90s to help fill in the shots, which really made it feel like a 90s movie. There was also the Blockbuster and Radio Shack references, which were pretty rad. I remember going to Blockbuster a couple times when I was growing up. The soundtrack was full of 90s goodness. I know there's those that, are saying, well, the song choices were quote-unquote plot holes as they came out later in 1995 after the time the movie took place, but I don't think it really matters. I'm going to try not to cry. There were 2 Stan Lee tributes. The first was the opening title, and instead of the normal heroes that we see flash across, it was all of Stan Lee's cameos. The audience was completely silent, and it choked me up, and my eyes were definitely tearing up. And his second cameo was so good. He's sitting on the train as Carol is looking for the Skrull that she's trying to track down, and Stan Lee's reading the script from Mallrats, the Kevin Smith movie, where he had a cameo as Stan Lee. That movie was such a huge part of my adolescent years, and seeing that was another moment of me being choked up. And Larson gives him this adorable smile before she moves on to find the Skrull that she's after. Reading Kevin Smith's reaction to it made me not necessarily tear up or or anything like that, but I could feel his emotion that he was feeling over it. And he said, "Just saw Captain Marvel. I'm a blubbering mess. After a lifetime spent referencing the movies just referenced me. Many thanks to Marvel Studios and to my friend, the real Stan Lee, for the shout out. But if I'm now part of the Marvel Universe, did I survive the snap?" It was extremely touching and such an awesome moment. It'll be insane to see the rest of the films with his cameos, and it'll be really sad seeing the first movie after he no longer has one. So, outside of the movie, I wasn't really going to touch on this initially, but I feel like it's important to put things kind of into perspective for the movie as a whole. But there was tons and tons of controversy surrounding this movie before it even came out. It all started with Brie Larson giving a speech about diversity and inclusion of women and women of color, in particular when it comes to movies that are being produced for that they are the demographic of. And suddenly, droves of white dudes took to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you name it, to rally against Captain Marvel because of her giving that speech. They portrayed it as, quote-unquote, she doesn't want white dudes to see her movie, which isn't even remotely what she was saying. Arguably, most of the rhetoric was coming from rambling mouthpieces like Ethan Van Sciver, who has been the voice of Comicsgate, which is a topic of a completely different discussion, but Geeks and Gamers, Cosmic Book News, and The Quartering as well, which Jeremy from The Quartering has even said in his Endgame reaction video that he actually enjoyed Captain Marvel, but the way he words it is always to still placate to his audience of, women are bad. But they all started this mantra of, go see Alita instead, it's a real strong female lead, in hopes of ruining Captain Marvel's opening weekend box office earnings. It failed. The numbers came in, and it didn't even remotely affect it. Like I said, Captain Marvel made close to $500 million in its opening weekend globally, but the Comicsgate community took to Rotten Tomatoes to bombard the fan ratings with negative reviews. Because of that, Rotten Tomatoes had to take a step back and look at how their rating system works, because it's obviously easily manipulated. So, within a day, Captain Marvel had over 50,000 reviews and sat at I believe 30% in a fan score because of that whole campaign against Captain Marvel. To put that in perspective, Infinity War, after a year, has just over 50,000 reviews. So Captain Marvel got in one day what Infinity War got in a year. But Rotten Tomatoes had to remove thousands of those spam reviews because they were just all almost exactly the same, saying the same things. And we've seen this happen with Ghostbusters 2016. Like, I get Ghostbusters 2016 wasn't a fantastic movie, but it wasn't terrible. People saying that, oh, this is like a, one out of 10 movie. No, it's not. A 1 out of 10 movie is like Grind or Biodome or something. Like, those are 1 out of 10 movies. Anyway, it happened with Ocean's 8. It happened with The Last Jedi. It happened with The Force Awakens. There's just a kind of a pattern. So Rotten Tomatoes removes these spam reviews from Captain Marvel, and the Comicsgate community calls foul, and that their quote-unquote opinions are being oppressed, or that, quote, Disney is paying off Rotten Tomatoes, which is just stupid. That's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And they try to say it as, well, the person that's the head of Rotten Tomatoes used to work at Disney. Okay, so? Like, I used to flip burgers at McDonald's. It doesn't mean I'm never going to eat Burger King, and I'm only like allowed to be dedicated to McDonald's. It's like, that's stupid. That's such a dumb thing to say. They remove, like, so Rotten Tomatoes removes all the spam reviews and all of, like, the BS reviews, and they call foul. So Comicsgate community essentially created this outrage themselves, and they just keep going off of it. Like, they created the fake reviews, which in turn made Rotten Tomatoes have to remove them. And then so because they removed them, now they're spinning it as, oh, well, they're oppressing our opinions. Like, we can't voice our opinions. And these are just, they're all tied to political issues when you boil it down. It has nothing to do with the movie itself objectively, which is crazy that they just can't be civil enough to just not review a movie that they're not even going to see. But the ones who are like the hardcore MCU fans, still going to see it. Obviously, because it made 500 million worldwide. And it's great for me to be able to see girls or even boys who are able to grow up in a time when there are strong female heroes on the big screen, which is equally as important as having strong male roles on the big screen. Looking over at my girlfriend throughout the movie as it was going on, she was completely enthralled with the movie, and she was even singing along to the soundtrack as it was playing. And at the end, she looked at me and she was just like, she is completely badass. So just because you can't directly relate to the struggles of Captain Marvel, I can guarantee that there's an MC hero out there that you can relate to. I guess that's the bottom line. There's no point in ruining an experience or future experiences for other people over your own personal issues that you can't get over. So that out of the way, moving on to the after credit scenes. Everyone was so silent in the theater. Marvel gave us so much with a scene from Endgame as the first after credit scene. It was like mid credit scene. The Avengers left on Earth are trying to contain, they have like Fury's beeper, and it's in like this containment field, and it's being charged, and it's like flashing, and they're trying to figure out what's counting down to, what does it mean, like what's coming, and then it powers off, and they're all just kind of like, what the hell? And then Captain Marvel just pops up, I mean, out of nowhere almost instantly, and she's just like, where's Fury? I just got chills. It was so cool. But, and there's like 20 some odd years of time between the ending of Captain Marvel and the events of Endgame. So it'll be interesting to see if later on, if the sequel might take place somewhere in between those two timelines. We might get to see more of the Kree Skrull stuff and set stuff up for that, which I think will be really cool. And then the second after credit scene was more of like a gag joke type. The Flurkin, Goose, he throws up the Tesseract onto Fury's desk, kind of like a cat would a hairball. Which, side note, the Flurkin are an endangered species in the Marvel comic universe, which is probably why the Kree were wanting to keep it, or possibly, they wanted to have it, or to have it, for disposal or something, because it was dangerous. But the stomach of Flurkins are actually pocket dimensions, so anything that gets swallowed gets sent into a different dimension, which I thought was interesting. So in the comics, Carol doesn't know that Chewie, her cat, is a Flurkin, and so Rocket Raccoon does, and he tries to kill it, and it was like a pretty funny little segment, and an introduction to that kind of race of character. That was pretty cool. But wrapping up my Captain Marvel review, it was just a fantastic, fun movie, and it was great seeing the backstory of S.H.I.E.L.D., seeing a young Nick Fury, and just a great spin on a superhero origin film, which was a breath of fresh air. By no means is this my favorite MCU movie, but it came at a perfect time sandwiched between Infinity War and Endgame, which are both darker toned movies. And as a reader of the 2012 comic run of Captain Marvel, I thoroughly enjoyed this MCU installment, and I'm counting down the days for Endgame. Can't get here soon enough. So speaking of Endgame, this is a little bonus snippet for this review. Today, Marvel dropped the newest trailer for Avengers Endgame, which showcased a lot of new footage, but also highlighted older footage showing where some of the heroes came from. It starts with flashbacks of Tony Stark from Iron Man 1 after he leaves the cave, and him speaking to Pepper about his life and their life together. It's not quite clear if this is another part of the message we saw from him from the first trailer, where he's on the ship, or if he's back on Earth and he's actually talking to her, or if he's leaving her a goodbye message before a mission or something. Then we see flashbacks of Steve Rogers pre-Soldier Serum with quotes from an older Peggy Carter from Winter Soldier. This movie will definitely involve time travel, so I almost wonder if we'll see her again in Endgame, which is possible. At the end of her narration, though, we see Hawkeye teaching his daughter how to shoot a bow and arrow. Then it's a close-up shot of Clint with his daughter, and it's his pre-Mohawk phase, which leads me to personally believe it takes place before the snap/decimation, or as it's happening. How damn heartbreaking would it be to see that on screen? Talk about dark. Then we see Hawkeye in Japan as Ronin, where Black Widow finds him. Then it cuts to a flashback of Steve as Peggy's pallbearer at her funeral. Then we see flashbacks of Asgard with Thor and Odin. Then it cuts to people being snapped on Wakanda as he watches. We see more that leads me to believe that there will be even more of a time jump between the ending of Infinity War and Endgame, and possibly even another one in Endgame. There's only one real clue to the plot, as we hear Natasha say, even if there's a small chance, we owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try. As she says this, we see Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, in front of a house whose grass is way overgrown, and he's looking at missing people signs, which points that he escapes the quantum realm well after the snap occurs. We see Hawkeye running through an exploding corridor. We see Rocket perched on War Machine's shoulder, which I'd totally watch a Rocket and Rhodey team-up movie. That would be so badass. Then we get a few clips of the heroes saying, we will, whatever it takes, whatever it takes, followed by a montage of Avengers suiting up for battle. Ant-Man, and we see Thor with Stormbreaker. We see Nebula attacking someone, but it's kind of hard to tell who it is because it looks like she's still dressed up in what she was wearing when she was on Titan. We see Cap all covered in dirt and grime. Ant-Man leaps across a pencil in a fiery room. Then it ends with Tony saying, whatever it takes. Then a splash page of Avengers Mansion interior with the surviving Avengers walking through the hangar, wearing new matching suits that look like updated Quantum Realm suits with Avengers branding on them. Then it ends with a stare down between Thor and Carol Danvers as he calls Stormbreaker to his hand. It whooshes past her head. Neither of them move, staring each other down until she gives them a little smirk. Thor smiles, then laughs and says, I like this one, to Black Widow and War Machine. Holy shit. I watched this 10 times today throughout the day. The first time I was getting, emotional? I guess that's the best way to describe it. The way they had the flashbacks to previous installments of the movies, having personal emotions tied up with those, damn, Endgame is going to bring it, man. So my takeaway from that teaser trailer, or from that trailer, which I feel like this is probably going to be the last one we get before April 26th. So my takeaway from this is that, number one, we don't see Thanos in this at all, which I think is great. We know he's playing Farmville on some planet, and that's good enough for me. I don't want to have like a mountain of information going into this movie. I also have a feeling that he possibly won't end up being the ultimate villain when it's all said and done in Endgame. Number two, I definitely feel like we're going to be seeing some time travel via the quantum realm. I think their plan is going to be to travel back in time and grab the Infinity Stones before Thanos can get them and attempt to use them against him, which could possibly cause catastrophic levels of consequences. Because when you start messing with quantum realms or like different, time traveling and all that, stuff can get messed up. Number three, I'm definitely interested to see where Captain Marvel fits into the story arc. Like I said in my review, I feel like she's going to go binary again and have to essentially reach hard. So I feel like that's probably going to be her Achilles heel, as Kevin Feige said. Wow, what a time to be a comic book fan, guys. So, this concludes this episode of the Scruffy Looking Nerd Herders podcast. Thank you so much for your support and for listening. Please, if you like what you heard, like, follow, subscribe, review, all that good stuff. Share with your friends. I'm on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and YouTube. There's near infinite ways to listen. Be sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at SLNH Podcast, and be sure to pick up some merch. There's a link in the description. And thank you so much for your reviews and your comments. It really helps me grow the podcast and get better. This is Tyler from the Scruffy Looking Nerd Herders podcast signing off, and may the Force be with you.